Hi, I'm Sheila Layton. Welcome to the Beyond Coincidence Show, where every moment holds a miracle and we talk about seeing the hand of God in our lives. Call it a God wink or a tender mercy or whatever you want. Everyone on this show has seen the hand of God or their higher power in their lives in a very real and personal way. Hey everybody! So today I have a really cute, fun, exciting guest. Her name is Annie. I just found her on Instagram. She just sort of showed up in my Instagram feed and I was like, who is this cute Christian girl? Anyway, so Annie Mayfield is a 4-time Amazon bestseller, 7 times author as of just recently, and a corporate account executive. She also hosts her own podcast called Made to Shine, which, by the way, is fantastic, that has listeners in over 72 countries and was a top 10% globally streamed Spotify podcast in 2023. She has been featured on Forbes and the New York City Journal for her efforts to remind the younger generation how divinely loved they are, so they may shine their spirit in all that they do. She graduated from Wofford College with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, where she played tennis and ran track. So welcome, Annie.
Thank you. Sheila, you're amazing. And I'm so honored to be on here. What you're doing is so profound. And what I think is so cool is you speak such truth and love to all people, of all ages, of all genders, of all communities. And so I just want to encourage you and say thank you. I'm so honored to get to be part of what you're doing today.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. Okay, so Annie, what does your life look like right now? I know you're super busy.
Oh, yes. Well, aren't we all busy? I think we live in a day and age where I don't know of one person that's like, you know what, I'm not that busy. Everyone is busy. I think so. If I look at my life right now, there is a lot going on, right? There's a lot being juggled. I think when I think of that question, it's like, well, what's most important to me right now? So day-to-day life looks like I have a family that I love to death. We all live within like a 2-mile radius of each other.
Nice.
And I'm actually here at my parents' house because of the hurricane coming through Atlanta. So we're all bunkered down. We're good. But just saying, very close with my family. They're the most important thing to me, as well as like my relationships. So my friendships, all of that, so important. I am an author. So my last book came out on Tuesday. So writing is something that and we can talk about that, but it's never something I set out to do. It was just something I always did, more for me, and then kind of God put it on my heart to share it with others. I do have the podcast that I adore because its mission is really to remind every person you have a ministry. Your ministry isn't just saved for preachers and pastors on Sundays. It's where you take God's light in everything you do.
I love that so much. Like,
Yeah.
I so agree with that. I love that that's something your podcast. I hear you say that everyone has a ministry. I love it.
Yeah, they do. And you know, it's funny because another massive part of my life is I have a full-time corporate job. I'm in corporate technology sales. And it's so funny because for so long, Sheila, I thought like I was such a failure because I wanted to be like a full-time entrepreneur. I wanted to do the podcast full-time. I wanted to do all the stuff full-time. And what's so cool is and really this has been the past 2 years when the podcast kind of shifted. It was at first a self-development podcast. And then when my faith grew, I really felt the Lord put on my heart, like, Annie, you have just as much of a ministry when you go into your corporate job as you do when you talk about me on this podcast. And so I get so inspired to tell this younger generation or any generation, like, you really do have a ministry wherever you go. And so I do a full-time corporate job as well. And it's so cool because like, I feel just as effective shining God's light as I do there than I do with my family or my middle school group that I counsel on Sundays or my podcast or my books.
Yeah. So and I just want everyone to know that you just barely turned 26, right?
Yes, I did. I did turn 26 a couple months ago.
Yeah. So you're still really young, doing so many good things. So Annie, tell me, what was life growing up in your home? Did religion play a part, siblings, those kind of things? How did that all work?
I love that question. So I was so blessed to grow up in a home where definitely God was part of kind of the equation of conversation, right? Like my parents are beautiful believers, and my dad especially has such a personal relationship with the Lord. That is something that counseled me so much just by example growing up, and my mom too. That all to say, what we didn't do as a family is we weren't the church family. We weren't the family that was like, we're going to church, hell or high water. We're a big sports family. And so growing up, church, and I actually kind of commended my parents for this. It was something they really put on the decision of their children. So I'm one of four. My mom had four kids, all under the age of 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
And none of us were twins. So it was like chaos to the ninth degree. We were energetic, we were hyper, and we were all very athletic. So sports was massive in my family. Three of us played college sports, me included, as you read. All that to say, church was something that growing up, I would say, because it wasn't forced, it really helped me kind of develop my own personal relationship with the Lord. I won't speak for my siblings because it's actually cool. My mom talks about this. I was on a show recently, and they actually pointed it to her in the audience, like, what's cool about your children and their faith? And she's like, well, what's cool is I have two daughters that love the Lord and two that don't. And, it's like,
is it 4 girls in your family?
So one boy. So the boy's the youngest. I
Okay.
have two sisters, but she's like, as a parent, it's so easy to feel like a failure, like you did something wrong. But it's like, no, like you can set the best example, and guess what? It's up to the Lord. Like, and so that was just something I wanted to share because I'm not a parent, but I can imagine you put a lot of weight on yourself for how your children turn out. All that to say, growing up, the Lord for me, when I was young, I was kind of weird. I was definitely like, I would be in my room by myself and just be talking to myself, but I didn't know I was talking to God. But at the time, I just knew there was this thing that loved me so much and just delighted in me. And like, I think my relationship with the Lord at a young age was very much like, he's my best friend. I mean, I take him with me everywhere. So when I go on the tennis court, he's with me. Like, he isn't just at church on Sunday. He's with me everywhere I go. And
Annie, was that something that your parents talked to? I mean, you didn't go to church formally, but did they say, Annie, Jesus is with you. You're never alone. Like, is that something they sort of instilled in you, or did you just sort of have that as a gift?
That's such a good question. I think both. I think though my dad actually to me instilled that in me, I think by example. So when we would go to church, I remember, and this is so funny, but I wrote about this in one of my books. So, church services, they offer like cookies and all this stuff when you leave. And I would be so hyped for the cookies. So I would leave. I would want to get out like 5 minutes early. So I was like, I'm getting first dibs on those chocolate chip cookies. But my dad, I remember I'd peek back and he would always kneel down and stay after and like just be talking to God. And I remember in my little kid brain that registered as, wow, this God is worth missing first dibs of the cookies over just to talk to. And so what that did is, yeah, and as a little kid brain, I was like, okay, wow. So this God that's with me all the time, like he's also kind of a big deal. And I think that was the first time it instilled in me a sense of awe. It's like that's something I pray for myself every day. It's like I don't want to lose my awe for God, because yes, He's my best friend and He loves me so much, but He is powerful, and we are called to fear Him. And sometimes I think I limit Him to the ways I limit myself. Mm-hmm. And so I think at a young age, I just I saw that by example, and I didn't want to do life without Him. And just I don't know, He always felt like light to me, and I always wanted to be near the light. Is how I would put it.
So did you guys pray as a family ever, or did they just tell you to pray to God on your own? Like how did prayer become, I mean, obviously your dad set that really powerful example that day in church and the cookies and all that, but how did they instill, how did that work as far as prayer goes? Or that's something you just kind of figured out on your own?
Both. So we would always say the Lord's Prayer before bed. I remember my dad.
Like as a family?
So before bed, like when they would tuck us in.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, when my dad would like tuck each of us in, we had that thing memorized young. But what we did not do as a family was ever be like, hey, we're going to pray about this right now. Like we're going to like, you're anxious, you're up to like, we're going to pray about this. That was not. So even I think my journey with prayer, and that's why I love you asked this, my journey with prayer has really matured probably the past 3 years. The first time I ever prayed for people, like me out loud. I remember I was at a coffee shop with a friend, and she prayed for me out loud. I was like, in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, who's going to be looking at us? Like, is this going to be weird? It was a very public place. And I was like, okay. And she was like, okay, pray for me now. I was like, okay, well, okay, like, all right, let's try. And but I think that's encouraging for people, because it's like prayer sometimes is awkward and it's not perfect and it doesn't have to sound great. But even the Bible talks about, like, when you pray, like, do it in private, go close your door, do it in private. But I think when you do it in public, it should be a reflection of the private conversations you're always having with God. And so all that to say, I remember I think this was a couple months ago, just to go back to your question of how kind of praying for each other randomly was very not what my family did. My mom and I were on a walk, and she was really struggling with some things with work going on. And I felt, that feeling, Sheila, I know you do, where you feel that little nudge saying, we're going to pray about it. You're going to pray over mom. And I was like, I'm not going to do that, because my family doesn't do that. And
you didn't know if your mom, how she would think about that, hey?
I was like, I think she's gonna look at me like I have 3 heads. But I remember we got to the garage, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna pray for you, Mom, if that's okay. And she was so delighted by that. But we get so in our heads, and it's like, it really is true. If you sacrifice 10 seconds of awkwardness for what will be eternal gifting, it's so worth it. And it's just a muscle. It's not natural. It is not natural, but it's so worth it. But again, I think that first starts with your own personal prayer life with God.
No, I completely agree. Yeah. You sort of develop that relationship through prayer, right? And then, like you say, you kind of felt that little prompting, and don't ignore those, right? Like, those are coming from God. Like, the Holy Spirit is saying, like, hey, Annie, you need to pray about this. And my experience is 99.9% of the time, people aren't offended. They're touched that you want to take your deep faith and share it with them.
It's so true. And you would be shocked at, not you specifically, but just people would be shocked at the amount of people that have never had someone pray for them. It truly, never had someone pray for them specifically, like say the words, Annie Mayfield, I am praying this over you. And that's something I actually never experienced until the past couple of years. With the new friendships and with people in the church that I've grown closer to. But I hadn't experienced that until a late age. And it is, it will bring you to tears. It will move you just to know that there's someone out there that's willing to speak life over you and bring you in that connection with the Father. It reminds you you're not by yourself.
Yeah, it's a special time, right? It's a special connection with people, and you're like, wow, they care about me enough to pray for me. Like, that's really powerful.
It's so powerful. And I think sometimes especially well-meaning Christians too, it's like, I'll keep you in my prayers. And it's almost like this last resort thing. I even recently had a loved one kind of going through a really hard time. And I remember wrestling with God. I'm a fixer, right? I like to fix,
Me too.
especially with my loved ones. It's like, what can I do? What can I buy? What process can I put in place? And I was looking at all the stuff, and God was like, are you done? Because I can't, there's nothing else I can do. I have exhausted my options. And I just felt the Lord say, like, why is prayer always your last resort? Why is it that thing that you think is kind of the last resort to go to versus actually looking at it as the weapon it is? Phil Wickham has a song that's, I fight my battles on my knees. And that's something I'm working on, Sheila, right? Like, that's something I'm continuing to work on, because my nature is to say, how am I fighting? Like, what can I do to fight this? But I'm really working on fighting things on my knees now and trusting in the God that says he's going to do a greater work than I ever could behind the scenes.
Yeah, sort of letting prayer be your first line of defense instead of your last, right? But I think, again, you talked about a spiritual muscle. I think that's part of that, that if you've grown up your whole life being somebody who just take charge, get her done, whatever, prayer's not the first thing on your mind. But as you practice that, then your mind begins to shift a little bit, right? And you're like, oh, I can actually pray about anything because God doesn't think anything is stupid. If it's important to me, it's important to Him,
Yes,
right?
yes. And that's such an important thing to remember because I remember, gosh, this was a couple years ago, but I once heard it put, God is a God that can swim in all the ends of the pool. Sometimes we think prayers that are shallow are not allowed to be told to God. It's like, God, please help me with my report that I need to give to school tomorrow. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, He has world hunger to solve. He doesn't care about my philosophy report, but He does.
He
I
does.
mean, He's the God that if you care about it, He cares about it. I mean, I think about my gosh, I don't have kids, I don't have nieces and nephews, but I think about, a parent. You can imagine if a parent had a small kid and they were worried about their fingerprinting not being good for class tomorrow, you would care about it because it's your kid.
Right.
And I think sometimes we take two stances. Either we think of God as like our best friend and we don't think of Him as the Lord to be feared, but sometimes we only look at Him as the Lord to be feared and not our Father that just cares about what we care about in the moment.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I believe that we are His children, right? That, I mean, I'm a mom, and I often, my husband and I often talk about the older we get, our kids are older now, and we can sort of understand how our Father in heaven relates to us. Only He's way better at it. He doesn't get frustrated and angry like we do. Like we care about all of that, and we're starting to more understand about His love for us as we get older. So yeah, no, I think that's beautiful how you've sort of developed that relationship with God, right? Like
Yeah.
you've developed it through prayer, through meeting new friends. Is that kind of how you have developed your relationship with God, would you say?
Oh, yeah. I think what's so cool about your relationship with God is that it's never not developing, right? Because we are not perfect until we're on the other side of glory. We're not until we're in heaven, right? Like we're always developing and in process. And I think what's so neat about God, where I'm in a Bible study right now, we're going through the book of Hosea and just reading about how Gomer, for those who aren't familiar, she's the one that was in prostitution and Hosea made her his wife. And then she goes back to prostitution. And yeah, most probably the people listening don't struggle with prostitution, but people struggle with gossip and judgment,
Yeah.
maybe self-degradation, trying to live up to perfect expectations they set for themselves and feeling shame when they fall short. Like we all have these things we run to. And I think what's so great and kind about our God is my faith has really developed in those dark times, right? Like it's in the moments where I've fallen short. It's in the moments where I felt not good enough. It's in the moments where I have reached for all the things I wasn't supposed to make me feel better. Those things for me are like putting my worth in social media, putting my worth in follower count, putting my worth in performance in my job or books or what other people think about me, body image, right?
Mhm.
That's mine. Everybody has their own. But it's so kind of God. And just like the book of Hosea reads, it's like when you come back and you're broken, he made us from the dust. And what's so cool is like when you break, I imagine a pot and you put that light in that pot, you only see the light with the breaks and the cracks. And
Mhm.
that's what I think is so cool about that light being the Holy Spirit in us. The more I break, how good of a God is it to where when I let Him fill that break, I'm shining even brighter than I was before. And so it definitely has been a development of faith through lots of ups and downs. Also, discipline. I would say, like, I think we've lost the art of discipline in this world. And, someone once told me it's like, you start desiring to go run a mile after you've been disciplined to run a mile a couple of times.
Right.
And I think about the times I've fallen short, there was sometimes a desire to go to God's word and a desire to talk to Him. Sometimes it was a discipline. Sometimes prayer is hard. I mean, literally last night I was going through some things and I was like, Lord, I don't feel like talking to you right now. I don't want to talk to you about this because I know what you're going to say. And I'm like, are you even listening? Like, do you even care about this? And what I think is so cool though, is if you have that commitment to speak to Him, God can only bless who you honestly are. If you pretend to have it all together, to pretend to have it perfect, he can't meet you there. Or he won't meet you there. He's going to meet the real and raw you. And so I think yes, it's a desire to build and develop that relationship. It's also a surrender. It's also at times a discipline. It's saying, Lord, I'm going to talk to you even though I don't feel like it. And I believe you're the God that can handle that.
I love that. So your desire, surrender, discipline. I love those words, right? Because it is, if you don't have a desire to have a relationship with God, you won't. I mean, and often, like you said, that relationship, especially if you're somebody who doesn't really care about that, but then something really hard happens in your life. And we turn to God in those hard times because it's in those times that our faith grows, right? We kind of put it to the test because when things are just cruising along, you're like, whatever, I got this, God. When really, I mean, He's there helping us get there. And, but I love that like surrendering is a thing. And it does take self-discipline to do those things in our lives daily, right? Whether it's read scripture, get into the word, pray, do service to other people. That takes time out of those busy lives we were talking about, right? And if that's not a priority and you're not disciplined in that, if you're somebody who's had the Spirit with you, you will feel, for me, I feel kind of disconnected. I feel a little bit alone. I feel a little bit dark when I'm not doing those holy rhythms of my life. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I love that you use the word rhythm because I always joke. People think I'm a morning person because I get up so early. I am not a morning person. I have made myself a morning person because I recognize, like, if you don't set intention for your day's going to set it for you.
Yes.
And I think we live in a world that we are reacting to our days. We wake up, we scroll on social media, we check our email, and we let our calendar determine our sentiment that day and our attitude. And all that to say, for me, like, you have got to protect your first minutes of the day. You've got to, because it sets the tone. Even Jesus, a couple months ago, actually, we were talking about my next book, You Matter. The inspiration for that was a talk I did a couple months ago to my high school, and the scripture for it was in Matthew, when Jesus, like, he continuously in the morning stole away from his disciples and the crowd to spend time alone with God. And I was like, listen, if you don't set the tone for your day and, get in the word and get the Spirit reminding you that you are good enough, that you're worthy, that you are your identity in Jesus, the world's going to tell you what you are. And it's always going to say, you're not good enough. You're missing the mark. You're falling short. And so all that to say, in the morning, I protect that time. And the reason I liked why you said the word rhythm is because I used to in quiet time almost like a prison. It was like I had to do it every morning. That's not realistic. And I once heard it put, think of it more like an anchor. So when you have an anchor, what's the role of an anchor? It just keeps the boat in the right area. There might be times you drift off, but it brings it back. There might be times you drift the other way, but it brings it back. So, it's not, because I used to be like, crap, I didn't do it this morning. My whole week is ruined. And you can't put that on yourself. Life happens. But protect your morning. I'll also say you can talk to God at any time. And there's actually a book I love. I'm blanking on the name, but it talks about the different ways people connect to the Lord because it's not all the same. I have a friend who she loves to travel and she sees the Lord so much through music and seeing God's creation. I see the Lord in books. I'm a big nerd, so I love reading. I love apologetics. I like writing. I don't really like to travel. And so don't confine your communion with God to the way you think it should be or the way other people are doing it. Figure out what works for you and then protect it.
Yep, I love that. I say that a lot to my kids. I'm like, listen, your relationship with God is your own. Your prayers are your own. I mean, I pray in the shower. I pray when I'm driving. I don't just get kneeling beside my bed and pray. I mean, I feel like that journey to your relationship with God is as varied as there are people on the planet. Like you say, you don't like to travel. So you see it more in the word, right? So you see more when you're reading scriptures, you see God there. I'm assuming, is that what you mean when you say that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. And it's like where you feel him the most, where he meets you the most. And that is, again, like, Sometimes I think about the altars in the Old Testament, right? Like they would lay altars down to remind them of what God did and to commune with God there. But then there's also moments where God just meets them randomly in the moments of transition. Jesus' entire ministry was like a transitional ministry. It was when he was on the way to places was when his best miracles took place. And I think it's like having those altars in our life, that dedicated time, that morning time, that afternoon time, that night time, but also just saying, Lord, like I pray for a heart that's open to interruption today.
I love that.
Surrender to that interruption, because I know you could interrupt me on my way to my next appointment, and I want to be open to that.
I love that. Yeah, divine interruptions, right?
Yes.
Love it. Love it. So Annie, I know that you have probably been thinking about a specific experience of where you saw the hand of God in your life. Let's get into that. Share that with us.
Okay. So this is actually very recent, but I think it's really relevant. This was last week. And so quick call out that I think would be awesome for everybody to have. It's so easy to forget what God has done for us. It's so easy to forget. He has done so many things. And a mentor of mine a few years ago gave me the best advice, which is you need to have altars in your life. So in the Old Testament, when God would do something amazing for them, they would lay an altar down, and then they would go back to that altar to remind themselves, to commune with God, be like, he did this then, he will do it now. And so I call it my God Moments Google Doc, but it's a Google Doc. And anytime I have a God moment, I write down the date, and it dates back to when I was a freshman in college.
I love it.
And at night, I'll just go through it, because to me, it's so easy to forget. We're sheep, right? We're so forgetful. And a great example of when I was forgetful was 2 weeks ago. So my next book came out this past Tuesday. It's called You Matter. And it's reminding people like you matter, no matter what expectations you set that you fell short of, no matter what other people say of you, no matter what you say of yourself. And it's so funny because I think we often, and you probably would agree to this as a creator, but we often speak or write to us, to the people and like the person we are in our heart that needs that encouragement. I always speak the encouragement I so crave to hear from my own self. And because I'm my biggest critic, right? And so a week and a half ago, my book came out on Tuesday, and all my publishing team, we had this massive plan of like the promotional content, all the stuff. About 2 weeks ago, I was just really discouraged. I don't know if it was the enemy. I think it was more just myself and my thoughts, but I just felt so discouraged. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't think I can do this. I'm afraid of what people are going to think. And then I started comparing myself to people that I thought were so much further ahead of me, and people with like more podcast downloads, more followers on Instagram. And again, this is me being vulnerable, but I think this will help a lot of people because we all have this avatar of who we think is doing better than us. And when we don't meet that metric, and of course, we don't see there behind the scenes, we get discouraged and just feel like we should stop. Because what's the point of what I do? Because it will never meet what they do.
Yeah, we compare our worst to their best.
Yes.
Which is so unfair and not even realistic. Like, what is that saying? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you were experiencing, right? Like, that's the adversary for sure. Right?
Yeah.
That's not God.
Exactly. Because it wasn't, I guess that's a great way to put it. And sometimes too, it's not even comparison to other people. It's comparison to where you thought you should be by now, or how you thought your life should go. I think that's the biggest trick the enemy has on us is I should have been here by now. I should have done this by now. And so I told my team, and they were like, this is not a good strategy. But I was like, I am getting completely off social media. Like I will just, the next time I go on will be to announce the book, but I need time away. Like I'm feeling discouraged. I'm feeling like I just not need to quit, but I'm like, I don't know what to do. Cause I feel like I don't really have it in me right now to continue. I just feel like, what is this all for? And again, it's so crazy. One of my dear friends that actually is another God story. We met on the side of the street. I loved her dress and I complimented it. 2 years later, we do a Bible study every Friday together. She is so dear to me, but I was sending her an audio message like, friend, I really need prayer right now. This is what's going on. And she sent me a prayer like, Lord, give Annie a tangible just some random email, text out of the blue that gives her that encouragement she needs. Well, last Thursday, it was wild, but I had a guest on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. She's a professional volleyball player, and she's so delightful. Anyway, she just sent me out of the blue this massively long email about all the episodes of my podcast she's listened to and all the books she's read that she ordered. And I was like, wow, she didn't. And it was just so crazy because that was such a tangible answered prayer. But going back to what we talked about earlier, which ties into this, it was a friend that prayed that over me. And then that prayer was answered. And the Bible says where two or more are gathered, so the Spirit is there. And like when Kaylee prayed that over me, and it happened. And I put that on my Google Doc sheet because I was like, Lord, to me, this was enough fruit just to keep going. And sometimes we need that. We just need enough fruit to take that next step.
Right.
And the Lord is faithful to meet you there if you ask for it and if you're open to it. If you surrender to what that looks like, So that's how God is really like most tangibly moved, I would say, that was last Thursday, so the last week.
Wow. That's beautiful, right? Like exactly what you needed. You didn't know how that was going to play out. And that was exactly what you needed when you needed it. Like that's beautiful. So Annie, my final question to you then is, why do you think, you've kind of alluded to this already, but why do you think it's important to recognize the hand of God in your life? You've got your Google Doc, which is perfect and wonderful, because I'm sure that you've gone back to those God moments in those dark times and been like, God, where are you? And then you read this and this and this and this and this. You're like, okay, I know he loves me. I know he's there. I just got to hang on. But why do you think it's important to recognize his hand in your life?
Such a good question. I think one, it creates humility. I mean, I have lived the if it's meant to be, it's up to me lifestyle. I've lived that lifestyle, and it's tormenting. It's only as good as your next and last accomplishment. I remember, so my first book, I've written 7, but my first was the only self-development book I've written. All my other ones are more faith-based. And I remember the night I published that, I had almost like it wasn't clinically diagnosed. I was a psych major, so I'm careful to put that, but about what would be considered like symptoms of a panic attack. And it was because I was thinking, I don't have the idea for the next book. What's my next accomplishment? What's my next thing?
Yeah.
And you think about the weight of putting all of your worth and your ability to keep going, to climb to the top, to your accomplishments, to what other people think of you. The Lord's Prayer says on earth as it is in heaven. And I just think in heaven, what's going on in heaven? Everyone's worshiping the Lord. Their minds aren't on you. It's not on themselves. It's on God. What a freedom if all of our minds were just on God. Because then there's not this of, what does she think of me? What does he think of me? What do I think of myself? Because they're probably not even thinking of me because they're thinking of themselves and what other people are thinking of them. And it's just this prison of really just wrapped in ego being thinking too highly of yourself, but also thinking too low of yourself.
True.
And I think when you find your security in God, it keeps you from doing either of that. And it keeps you from feeling like you're only as good as your next or last accomplishment or what someone said about you or how you look that day, how much money you made. I think the other part of that, though, is being sensitive to God's hand on your life, because it's so easy in this busy culture. We use that word busy in the beginning, this busy culture. It's like when you eat food so fast, you don't even taste it. It's just
Right.
like you just scarfed it down and it leaves you feeling sick. Well, I think there's a lot of people in this world that are feeling so sick because we're living our lives not even tasting it. It's going so fast. We're like an octopus on rollerblades. We are going in so many directions, but there's no progress. And I think that's why every day I'm like, Lord, please make me sensitive to you. I want to see you. I want to pick up on things that other people wouldn't pick up on. Because the reality of it is we are literally walking in a painting created by the painter who is the creator of heaven and earth. You can walk outside. I want to have the spirit that's like, oh my gosh, that tree, Lord, I see your hand on my life because of that tree. Something so, but in order to be seen or seeing the hand of something, you have to be sensitive to it. So I think it's being the importance is so that you keep yourself from feeling too low of yourself because you're a new creation in him. Also being sensitive to the creator that made that creation and opening him up to give you that sensitivity. That isn't something you earn. That isn't something you like get your way to. Because that's how I used to think of things. It's like, Lord, help me make myself more sensitive. I'll work harder on that. It's something you ask for, and he gives it to you because he's a good God.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. To ask to be sensitive to that spirit and be able to see the things around you. Because so when I'm sure though, I mean, I've done it too, is that when you ask for that, it's like your eyes are opened, right?
Yeah.
You all of a sudden start seeing the hand of God, even like you say, even if it's in nature, especially like I love flowers, right? And so, I'll get a peony that will bloom and it'll be pink on the outside and orange on the inside. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how can people think there's not a God? Did you see this flower?
Yes. Oh, and it goes back to like the mission of the podcast I was talking about, or Made to Shine, which is you have a ministry everywhere you go. God is everywhere you go. Like God is in your corporate job. God is, and then the other day, my corporate boss, who's frustrated with some end of quarter stuff, she was saying something, and I can't remember what it was, but I remember thinking like, oh, that'll preach, right? Or it was something like the best things don't come quickly. I was like, oh, that'll preach. But your mind, when you seek first the kingdom, as Matthew tells us, you can't help but everywhere you go, even if it's considered a secular environment, you see God. Like some of the times I've seen God the most has been when I've been in places that it wasn't a church environment. It was dinner with friends on a Saturday night. It was a concert. I went to a country concert the other night. I was like, I just feel the presence of God here. Like I just like seeing people sing and their laughter. And it's just like, this is just so cool. But it's opening up that invitation for God to give you that wherever you are.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So, where can people find this new book, You Matter? And I have a question before you get into that. Tell me, because it says You Matter, what is a blue check mark in a blue checkmark world? What does that mean? So I heard you say that. I was like, I don't know what that means.
I would love to say. So a blue check mark is like on Instagram, it basically means you're verified. Like
in a blue checkmark world. Oh, okay.
Yes. But the reason I said that is because I remember there was a time, basically you have to qualify to be blue checkmark verified. It's typically for like famous people or people of a certain caliber. And I remember a couple of years ago when I had published a couple of books, and I just wanted to be blue checkmark verified so bad. And again, I'm a fixer. I tried to figure it out. Well, what do I need to do to qualify, all this stuff. And every time I applied, I got shut down for years. And I remember, Sheila, I was like, man, I'm never going to be that. Like, this means that my books don't mean anything. This means that what I'm doing means nothing because I'm not blue checkmark verified. And the way I translate that, and that's the reason that's that subtitle, is building your worth on the mark of Jesus in a blue checkmark world, is everyone has a blue checkmark. Everyone has that thing that they're like, once I get that, then I'm worthy. Once I hit that weight, once I am a mom, once I get through this adoption process, once I get to college, once I graduate high school, once I get a boyfriend, once I get married, we all have this blue check mark in our mind. And what I just recognized from years of not getting what was my blue check mark, which was actually a blue check mark, was recognizing like my worth was never made up in that. And so the essence of this book is, for years, I was looking for my worth in some place that it was never going to be found. And when I didn't find it, I associated its absence in that area with its lack of existence altogether. Whereas God's like, hey, sister, you are worthy, you matter, but you're not going to find it there. Just as you're not going to find the remote in the freezer. But if you don't find the remote in the freezer, it's not because there's no remote in your house. It's just it's not in the freezer. And for lack of a better example, I think we have a lot of people looking for the remote in the freezer and then being like, shoot, there's no remote here. And
then they give up.
And then they give up and they never get to watch TV.
So the new book, You Matter, where can people find it?
Anywhere books are sold. The links to my Instagram profile, Annie B. Mayfield, everything's linked there. Amazon's the one that's linked to the profile. That would probably be the easiest if people use Amazon the most. But it launched on this past Tuesday. So hardcover, print cover, as well as if you're an ebook reader, it's on Kindle as well.
Oh, Annie, that's so great. I wish you the best of luck with this new book. And and your podcast is called Made to Shine.
It's called Made to Shine. Yes.
Yeah. And so people can find that anywhere. And she's just so full of light and love and all the wonderful things. So Annie, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to talk with me about God and all things wonderful and full of light. I truly, truly appreciate it so very much.
Well, I appreciate you and you creating this space. I know what it goes to create a space that's an environment to, have the honor to talk about the Lord, but make people feel invited to do that. So you have such a special gift, Sheila, and you make people feel so safe and comfortable. And I'm just so encouraged by what you're doing. So keep shining, because it's radiant and you're affecting a lot of people.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, well, you have a great day. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you have an experience where you have seen the hand of God or your higher power in your life, I want to hear about it. Please send an email to Sheila@beyondcoincidence.com. Have a great day.